Being a Roman soldier might sound glorious when you picture shining armor and disciplined legions conquering the world. But the reality was far from noble. Behind the banners and victories was a life built on exhaustion, fear, and sacrifice. Most men didn't dream of joining the army. They were forced, desperate, or tricked by promises that rarely came true. What looked like honor on a marble statue was, in truth, one of the hardest and most unforgiving lives in the ancient world. Number 1. The harsh start. No one chose. Becoming a Roman soldier rarely began with pride. For most recruits, it started with poverty, pressure, or a local official who needed numbers. The empire stretched across huge frontiers, and it burned through men. Governors and recruiters trolled market towns and villages for tough bodies. Poor farmers with thin harvests and urban laborers without steady work were easy targets. Some men signed their names because the army meant meals and a place to sleep. Others went because family debt or trouble with the law made service look like the only door left open. In frontier provinces, auxiliary units drew in non-citizens with the promise of citizenship after long service. That promise was powerful, but the price was years of hard marching and a real chance of never coming home. Once accepted, a recruit swore the sacramentum, the oath that tied him to the emperor and the legion. It sounded ceremonial, but it had teeth. The army now controlled where he slept, what he ate, and how he spent every hour. He could not just walk away. In the early empire, ordinary legionaries were not legally allowed to marry while in service. That rule cut men off from normal family life. Letters were slow. Leave was rare. Your world shrank to your contubernium, the small tent group that became your new family, whether you liked it or not. The first weeks hit like a hammer. Recruits were sorted, shorn, and drilled until their bodies ached. Training started with wooden swords heavier than the real thing to build strength. Marches came fast. The standard was long distance at a steady pace with full gear on your back. New men learned to pitch a fortified camp from bare ground in a single afternoon. Ditches, ramparts, stakes, and watchposts were not special tasks. They were daily routine. The message was constant. You are part of a machine now. Vegetius described the ideal recruit as alert, strong, and disciplined, but the institution tried to manufacture those traits by force. Centurions carried vine sticks and used them when steps fell out of rhythm or shields dipped. The point was not cruelty for its own sake. It was about control. In the field, formation kept you alive. In training, fear kept formation tight. Equipment felt like a tax on the body. A recruit learned the weight of shield, helmet, and armor along with tools, rations, and stakes. He also learned that his pay would be docked for lost or damaged kit. From day one, the system taught him two lessons. The empire would feed you, but nothing was free. And once you crossed the camp line, your old life ended. The harsh start pushed many men to adapt fast or break. Those who adapted learned the rhythms of army life. Those who struggled discovered the other face of Roman discipline. Either way, almost no one walked into the legion for glory. Most were pushed by hard realities, and then molded by a harder institution that cared more about results than comfort. Number 2, the miserable pay and fake promises. When people picture the Roman army, they imagine steady pay and a secure future. But the numbers and the lived reality tell a different story. A regular legionary earned a stipend that looked decent on paper, yet deductions ate through it fast. The army charged men for clothing, boots, and gear. Food rations were not truly free. Medical care and equipment repairs could show up as line items against the wage. After the clerks finished their counts, a soldier often had little cash left for small comforts or to send home. Pay also arrived late. Months could pass with nothing in the purse, which pushed men to rely on credit inside the camp, or to gamble in hope of quick wins. The famous donatives that emperors handed out were not stable income. They were political gifts tied to loyalty during accessions or crises. A recruit might hear about big bonuses, but he could not plan a life around them because they came unpredictably and were often swallowed by debt. Coin quality also slid over time. Debasement and inflation reduced the buying power of wages, which meant a man could be paid more coins and still feel poorer in the market. Promotions were rare and usually required years of spotless service or a powerful patron. Most soldiers stayed at the bottom longer than the posters suggested. The promises at the end of service sounded generous. Veterans were supposed to receive a cash payout or a grant of land. In practice, many got plots far from home in thin soil on exposed frontiers. These grants were strategic for Rome, but hard for families trying to start over. Older men with injuries struggled to farm and defend their boundaries at the same time. Some sold their parcels for a fraction of the value and drifted to towns where work was uncertain. Auxiliary soldiers chased citizenship as the big prize after long service. That reward was real for many, but the road to it was long and dangerous. Death, disease, or discharge for injury could cut the path short and erase the payoff. Even during service, the rules kept life small. The ban on legal marriage for much of the early empire meant men could not build secure households. Partners and children often lived near forts without protection or formal status. Loot from campaigns looked like a way to break the cycle, yet officers claimed the richest shares and distributions favored senior ranks. Ordinary soldiers learned that pay was a lever of control, not a promise of comfort. The empire kept them marching with just enough coin to survive, and a future reward that often vanished when they finally reached it. Number 3. The endless march and grinding routine. A Roman soldier spent far more time walking, digging, and setting up camp than swinging a sword. Most days began before sunrise with orders to move, and the first task was to shoulder a load that felt like a second body. A full kit meant armor, shield, weapons, a cloak, cooking gear, rations, tools, and the famous stakes for the knight's fortifications. The army trained men to cover long distances at a steady pace, and the expectation on campaign was simple. Keep formation. Keep moving. Fall behind and you risked punishment and the scorn of your tent mates. The smallest building block of this routine was the contubernium. 8 men shared a leather tent, a pack mule, and most of the chores that made life grind on. They took turns leading the animal, carrying tools, and guarding baggage on the road. That shared burden did not end when the column halted. Stopping meant work, because the legion did not sleep in open fields. Every halt turned into a fortified marching camp with measured streets, a ditch, a rampart, and a gate plan that veterans could mark out in their heads. Officers and surveyors chose the site. Then thousands of hands cut turf, drove stakes, and threw up earth with a delabra, the heavy pick that most soldiers swung more often than their swords. The routine was so fixed that writers could describe the layout from memory. It protected the army from surprise, but it also meant the day never truly ended. Once the camp stood, there were watch lists, sentry posts, water runs, and the constant business of cooking and mending. Meals were plain and built to travel. Grain was the staple, turned into porridge or bread when ovens were available. Soldiers drank water cut with sour wine or vinegar to make it safer and more refreshing after hours on the road. Fatigue was a constant companion. Blisters, strained backs, and raw shoulders came from miles underweight and from tools biting into hard ground. Disease followed the column because crowded camps, bad water, and changing climates wore people down. Even so, the machine kept time. Recruits learned that the march had a rhythm, and that discipline made it bearable. Veterans set the pace and kept jokes light to push through the last mile. The grind was not about heroics. It was about repetition, muscle memory, and collective habit. Day after day, the legion advanced, built a wall around itself, slept a little, and did it all again. That is the part of soldiering no monument shows, yet it explains how Rome held its borders for so long. Number 4. The horror of battle and psychological collapse. Roman battles looked controlled from a distance, but inside the line, they felt like a storm that would not end. A soldier stood shoulder to shoulder with his contubernium and could barely see more than a few men to the left and right. The shield pressed into his ribs. The helmet narrowed his vision and turned every shout into a dull echo. Orders came as simple commands to advance or hold, and there was no room for doubt once the horn sounded. The first impact shook the body more than the mind. Shields slammed, spears cracked. You felt the push of the formation and the ground slipping under your sandals. Training taught you to jab low with the short sword and to keep the shield high, but training did not remove the smell of iron and sweat, or the way hands shook after the third or fourth exchange. The longer the line held, the more the field turned into a maze of bodies, dropped gear, and mud. Men stumbled over friends and enemies, and then vanished in the crush. No one wrote songs about the noise. It was a rolling roar made of pain, fear, and command voices trying to keep shape in the chaos. The mental strain was not only about danger, it came from rules you could not escape. Retreat was a crime. Breaking the line meant death from the enemy, or punishment from your own side. That knowledge locked men in place, even when the brain screamed to run. Veterans learned tricks to survive the first minutes. They breathed slow. They watched the centurion for rhythm. They kept the stabbing motion tight and small. Those habits saved lives, but they did not protect the mind once the field went quiet. After a victory, soldiers moved among the wounded and saw faces they had eaten with the night before. Burial details worked in silence and tried not to look into open eyes. The march resumed with dust still stuck in throats, and few wanted to speak about what had happened. Some men lost sleep and drank when they could. Others grew cold and sharp because it felt safer than feeling anything at all. Commanders praised discipline and wrote clear reports, but the rank and file carried memories that did not fit into neat accounts. The body healed faster than the mind. Scars closed while dreams stayed loud. Over time, the pressure showed up in small ways. Jokes turned darker. Tempers shortened in camp. A sudden noise pulled heads around too fast. There was no counselor and no real rest. The machine moved on and expected every man to keep pace. That demand created a second kind of battle, the fight to appear steady while the thoughts behind the eyes slid back to the field. Many veterans could describe a formation or a route by heart, yet they avoided telling the parts that sat in the chest like a weight. The horror was not one spectacular moment. It was the steady grind of fear, duty, and memory, and it bent even strong men in ways that did not show until long after the trumpet stopped. Number 5. The discipline that destroyed you. Roman discipline looked like order from the outside, but inside the ranks it worked like a grinding mill that wore men down day after day. Everything began with the oath. Once a recruit swore loyalty to the emperor and the standards, his life stopped being his own. Orders governed when he woke, what he ate, and how he moved. Centurions held the line with a mix of skill and fear, and the vine stick in a centurion's hand was not a symbol. It was a tool used in front of everyone to correct a dropped shield, a late response, or a sloppy formation. Punishments matched the crime in a way that felt absolute. Fall asleep on guard, and you faced execution by clubbing from your unit. Lose a weapon or abandon a post, and you could be flogged until you bled through your tunic. If a cohort broke in battle, commanders could declare decimation, which meant the men drew lots and every 10th soldier died at the hands of his friends. That ritual did not just remove the guilty, it taught everyone that the legion's survival mattered more than any single life. Rules reached into private hopes as well. For much of the early empire, legal marriage was off limits during service, which kept families unofficial and children without full protections. Leave was scarce, letters went through officers, and any complaint risked being read as insubordination. The daily system reinforced the pressure. Duties rotated across watch shifts, patrols, drill blocks, camp maintenance, and work parties for roads and fortifications. If a man stumbled, the correction was public, because the army believed shame kept the file tight. Rewards existed, but they taught the same lesson. Promotions to the first rank, or the chance to carry a standard, demanded spotless obedience and the ability to enforce it on others. Even small privileges came with strings, since pay deductions for gear and rations reminded everyone that the institution kept count. Religion and ritual tied the discipline to meaning. Soldiers saluted the standards, swore on the eagle, and took part in sacrifices before a march. These acts were meant to bind morale, yet they also made disobedience feel like a stain on the whole unit. Over time, men learned to swallow fear and show a calm face because the system punished emotion as weakness. The mind adapted to survive, but that adaptation came at a cost. You learned to obey first and think later because thinking too long was dangerous. The machine wanted steady hands and silent feet, and it got them by making resistance more frightening than any enemy across the field. Number 6. The Forgotten End. The finish line for a Roman soldier looked clear on a tablet, but it felt messy in real life. After decades in service, a man expected an honorable discharge, a cash bonus, and sometimes a plot of land. The state issued bronze diplomas that confirmed his rights, like the ability to marry legally and pass status to his children. On paper, it sounded like a clean reset. In practice, most veterans stepped into a world that had moved on without them. Bodies were worn down by marches, old wounds, and years of rough camp living. Hands that once swung a pick or a sword now shook when holding a plow. Many retirees reached frontier colonies where the promised acres were thin, stony, and exposed to raiders. The grant solved a strategic problem for Rome by planting loyal households along the border. It did not solve the daily problem of feeding a family in harsh ground with limited tools. Cash payments helped for a while, but inflation and coin debasement could drain value fast. A veteran who traded his stipend for supplies discovered that prices shifted under his feet. Some sold land cheaply and drifted toward towns, where work competed with younger men and guild rules. The legal benefits were real, yet complicated. For years, many soldiers had partners and children without formal protection. Discharge could legitimize families, but records were uneven, and local officials were not always helpful. Petitions to governors show veterans chasing exemptions from civic burdens that communities tried to dump on them. Immunities existed, yet villages still pushed retired centurions into unpaid duties because they were organized and literate. Not every man wanted to settle. A few hired on as guards, caravan escorts, or private muscle for estates. Others went back to the army in support roles because barracks life felt more familiar than village politics. The mental shift was harder to navigate than any frontier road. Years of drill and command made peace feel strange. Night watch habits lingered. Sudden noises pulled eyes to the door. Friends from the tent group were scattered across provinces or buried far away, which meant the only people who understood the memories were gone. Religion offered rites for oaths fulfilled, but there was no forum for grief. Communities respected the eagle tattoos and battle scars in public festivals, then returned to their routines. The empire had used veteran settlements to anchor its borders and refill local elites, and it kept rolling forward while individuals untangled their small lives. The brutal truth was simple. Service gave a man skills that mattered in war, and a kit of promises that sounded strong in a decree. Retirement exposed how little those promises protected him from weather, markets, and loneliness. Rome remembered its legions in stone and law. The men who carried the standards learned that memory did not pay the miller, heal a knee, or quiet a mind that still marched at night.